Right, okay, good morning everyone. We're going to get started now. Great to see you all here, and thanks for joining this symposium on building sustainable offshore wind futures through collaborative research programs. We're going to give an introduction to 5 research programs, some of which you may already be familiar with, and then we're going to have some discussion around some kind of interesting themes after that. So great to see you here, and I'll get started. So my name is Savitsky, and I'm representing the Carbon Trust. I'm based in London usually, but here for the week, and I'm going to be speaking about the Offshore Renewables Joint Industry Programme, which is the kind of flagship collaborative research programme in Europe for offshore wind environmental research. ORJIP was set up to help reduce offshore wind consenting risk. So what I mean by that is permitting risk. So we deliver research which is immediately practical for permitting decisions and deliver on the kind of highest priority industry issues with regard to offshore wind environmental impact and how this feeds into permitting decisions. We pull funding from industry, so we have 8 developer partners. We also pull funding from public funding, so the Crown Estate of Scotland and Scottish Government also support our projects at the minute. We've been active. We originally set up in 2012, kicked off in 2013 with ORJIP Stage 1, and you might be aware of some of our kind of larger studies that we conducted early on, such as the Burke collision avoidance study at Thanet Offshore Wind Farm. We're presently in ORJIP Stage 2, coming to the close of this. We have 14 projects that are live at present, conducting research in a number of different areas that I'll take you through over the next few slides, and we're continuing. So ORJIP Stage 2 closes in 2025, but we're moving to a third stage beyond that. The key thing about ORJIP is that we have a structure which engages multiple key stakeholders so that we can deliver consensus. As I said, what we're trying to deliver within our research projects are outputs that can be used immediately in permitting decisions, and they're kind of really pragmatic from that point of view. And to do that, we need to have consensus within results and within project scoping, within project selection, so that we're identifying the key projects and we're delivering them in a way that the outputs can be immediately used. So to do that, we have kind of 2 key bodies. We have an advisory network and a project expert panel on individual projects. And this engages key conservation bodies, key regulators, and key kind of commercial fishery stakeholders, if that's the theme, so that these organisations can be involved in project prioritisation, in selection of projects, in scoping projects, in designing outputs that can be used quickly, and ultimately kind of reviewing deliverables as they come through. So whilst we're kind of predominantly supported by industry funding, it's a really collaborative programme that really gets involved with a number of stakeholders to deliver research that can provide consensus. In terms of the areas of research that we conduct, the majority of work we do so far has been on impacts on ornithology. That's a kind of fact of European consenting, and that being the key priority in Europe. Cumulative impacts, so the impacts of scaling across multiple wind farms, is becoming an increasing priority as opposed to individual project level impacts. Impacts on marine mammals, predominantly from underwater noise, but also entanglement and barrier effects. Commercial fishing coexistence. Marine net gain and positive biodiversity impacts, including compensation. Impacts of transmission assets, including submarine cables. Impacts on benthic ecology, and impacts of underwater noise on fish. So we can conduct research on a kind of really large spread of areas. And as I said, at present, this is in rank order of what was deemed the kind of the highest priority for European consenting risk recently, but that's kind of reasonably fluid on a yearly basis. Just to go through kind of some of the impact that we've delivered through ORJIP, seabird collision risk is a kind of key area for which we are most well known. I've already alluded to the Stage 1 collision avoidance study conducted at Thanet Offshore Wind Farm, which is kind of the first large-scale seabird monitoring campaign focused on collision risk. This has been used kind of on numerous occasions to inform other seabird campaigns that have been conducted more recently. We followed this with a smaller common project which provides next steps and practical guidance for industry for how to conduct monitoring campaigns, including technology biases. Building approach for consensus and trying to understand how monitoring campaigns can actually be delivered in a way that can produce results that can ultimately impact collision risk estimates within environmental impact assessments. One of the kind of key conclusions of this is that because seabird collisions are such infrequent events, you need a really large data set before you can produce anything that's statistically conclusive. So we've currently got a new project termed Predictor, which is looking at this issue. So this is looking at harmonizing data sets from multiple seabird monitoring campaigns, understanding the various biases within the data sets depending on the technologies that have been used to collect those, so that you can use a larger data set and therefore be able to draw more statistically conclusive conclusions. And again, with collision risk, ORJIP's been really successful at collaborating with other countries across Europe, so really seen as the kind of leader with regard to this. Then just another kind of thread that's been constant through ORJIP is underwater noise impacts on marine mammals. So across two projects, the RECON project, Reducing Conservatism and Underwater Noise Assessments, and the RADIN project, the Range-Dependent Nature of Impulsive Noise, we've been able to collect noise measurement data from piling installation campaigns across the North Sea to be able to understand how measured data compared to environmental impact assessment estimates beforehand, and look at some of the kind of key features of this. So again, this is a prime example of collaborative research, being able to utilize data from multiple projects and multiple wind farms, and actually therefore be able to deliver better conclusions. And then one of the themes that we're talking about within this symposium is cross-border collaboration. So we wanted to touch on a kind of recent success, which was a workshop that we co-hosted with BOEM looking at cumulative sound exposure levels. So this is an area where there's huge opportunity for cross-border collaboration, and just thought I would raise that. And just on that point, we see cross-border collaboration as required for research. This helps unlock research funding. Multiple countries, governments have their own pools of funding. If you can access multiple of that, then you can have larger projects, and you can increase scale. You can increase data availability from wind farms across multiple countries. Again, then you're increasing the likelihood that you can draw the evidence base from which you can draw conclusions. Opportunities for emerging markets to learn from established markets where offshore wind has kind of already been constructed and where there is this pre-existing data is really critical. And to coordinate and align research effort to avoid duplication across different countries where that's not necessary, and where that can be potential waste of research funding. So that's enough for me for now. I'd like to welcome Emily Shumchenia from the Regional Wildlife Science Collaborative to speak next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Shumchenia. I'm going to be talking today about supporting the organized delivery of funding. So if you were here earlier this week and saw the RWSC Symposium on Tuesday, I'm trying to remember what day it is today. On Tuesday, a lot of this will be familiar, but we're going to talk about it through just a slightly different lens. So many of you likely know that RWSC was collaboratively established by the federal agencies, Atlantic Coast states, Atlantic Coast offshore wind developers, and several environmental nonprofits to serve as a coordination hub for all of the offshore wind research that they are requiring or voluntarily conducting. This helps limit redundancy. We can help suggest common data standards as we look across everything and increase data sharing and transparency. And this is, again, a very similar or the same slide that you saw on Tuesday, but focusing now on this second bullet of assisting partners in identifying how they can have the biggest impact with their funds, given their own particular experience, expertise, their programmatic goals, and what their current resource levels are. But we do a number of other things as well. So this, again, is the triad that we talked about on Tuesday of tools that RWSC is developing to support organized research funding. We essentially provide the forum for all types of discussions, but in particular on this topic, annual or even more frequent as needed discussions about what research we need to be conducting, what data collection is needed, and that's based on what's going on in the ecosystem, what is coming up in sort of the public discourse about offshore wind and wildlife, what we should be addressing, what research we should be conducting, and how it could be funded. So recognizing that multiple partners within RWSC have funds for research and data collection, how can we combine those available funds, leverage that, and probably on a smaller scale than what Ivan was just talking about, but cross-border, in this case, states and federal agencies collaboration, it could be really beneficial. So we have built a number of tools to support these types of discussions, syntheses around these topics, and decision-making. So I'm going to kind of walk through each tool and talk a little bit about how it can be used to support funding decisions. So just starting with our database of ongoing projects, this is super important for looking across everything going on, no matter who's funding it. It really relies on everyone sharing that information with RWSC so that we can aggregate it into a public resource, and it allows folks who use it to sort by geography or species group or even funder, and that helps you identify data gaps or research needs, right? So you can kind of see what's already being done and deduce from that what might be missing. This also, the way that we do this is through our expert subcommittees, which are composed of all of you and many of the experts on each of the species group topics. And so our subcommittee coordinators, the folks that convene those groups, have a really good perspective on what's been conducted and what data are being collected out on the Atlantic coast. And so when a state, for example, puts out an RFP, our subcommittee coordinators are really good reviewers of proposals because they have that very broad lens. So we've been encouraging states and other partners to use RWSC staff in that way. So if you're thinking about putting out a request for proposals, or you're thinking about funding something, coming to RWSC and saying, hey, we're thinking about funding this. Is anyone else in the area doing that? We can kind of connect you with, maybe there's a neighboring state thinking about a similar project, or maybe there's a federal agency working on a workshop plan that could address the topic you're interested in. So this database helps facilitate some of those conversations. We also talked about on Tuesday the research planning map. Again, very reliant on sharing of information with RWSC through those subcommittees. Those subcommittee coordinators are helping us build the data layers on this map. We aggregate all of the sort of ongoing research. Where is it happening? Who's doing it? What type of data are being collected into this public resource? You can explore by the particular method that people are using, whether it's acoustic telemetry or passive acoustic monitoring, and you can, obviously it's a map, you can look at different geographies. This has links to that project database, so you can learn more about what exactly is happening at a particular location. Again, this just helps with providing that context for how you might use your own funding. And then finally, the data catalog concept that we talked about on Tuesday. Common theme, this really requires and relies on sharing among all of the different sectors that participate in RWSC and the research community as well. We're serving as an aggregator. We put out a public information resource based on this aggregation. You can, or will be able to, when we build this tool, discover data relatively easily using the map, using a keyword about what you're interested in funding or what may have been funded. And this tool will provide essential metadata, links to places where the data exist, and key contact information for that data provider or data collector. So if you're, for example, this example came up the other day in discussing this with someone, if you're interested in tagging birds and you go to the map and find that someone tagged a bunch of birds in this particular location 5 years ago, you're able to contact them and say, how did that go? Was it difficult? Did you find, a good bird population there that was available to tag? What are some, tips and pointers that you might give us if we're seeking to fund an activity like that? How could we best continue a time series if we're, interested in the same location and same species and essentially create compatible and interoperable data sets? So just to wrap up, to ensure success of your funding program and even regional funding programs as RWSC, we'll be looking to a next phase relatively soon here. As research funds come to us, we will be issuing RFPs for our own research, our own sponsored work. To ensure success, we're really encouraging folks to allocate funds and capacity towards these regional coordination activities. Sharing information takes effort. We recognize that, and we want that to be prioritized for all of you as a small component of the work that you fund. Importantly, fund and give capacity towards information and data management, because again, having that consistency in information delivery really matters and makes things go quickly and smoothly, so we can build annual reports about who's funding what really quickly if everybody delivers that information to us in a consistent way. I've just talked a lot about sharing information with RWSC. Ways to do that are participating in our subcommittees and, of course, our sector caucuses, which represent each of those 4 sectors: feds, states, ENGOs, and industry is another great way that we exchange information. And this idea of if you are funding work, come to us and learn about ways that you can make those data consistent and interoperable, so that we can build sort of these regional pictures and continue to leverage these tools that you've all invested in. And I'll end it there.
Thank you very much, Emily. Now I'd like to welcome Katy Bland from Sea Grant and the Maine Offshore Research Consortium.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. Okay. So I'm Katy Bland. I'm with Maine Sea Grant, NOWRDC, and New Hampshire Sea Grant. And I came into the program management role for the Maine Offshore Wind Research Consortium earlier this year. Maine Sea Grant is taking on this role on behalf of the Governor's Energy Office, who the Maine Offshore Wind Research Consortium flows through. So the Maine Offshore Wind Research Consortium was established legislatively following this long roadmap process that the state of Maine undertook. So it was established to better understand the local and regional impacts of floating offshore wind in the Gulf of Maine, so a little bit more narrow of a geographic scope than the other programs talked about today. So the consortium includes representation from fishing industry, ocean experts, and others to inform these research priorities, and will work to align with related regional and national efforts. So the goal is to develop and execute a research strategy to better understand the local and regional impacts of floating offshore wind power projects in the Gulf of Maine. And those categories include opportunities and challenges to existing uses in the Gulf of Maine, including how to best support coexistence with the fishing industry, methods to avoid and minimize impacts on ecosystems and existing uses, ways to realize cost efficiencies in commercialization, and then most recently through LD 1895, what conservation actions and projects for impacted species and habitats can be taken. So the structure of the research consortium is fourfold. There's program management, which I sit in. We work with Sambas Consulting, the Carbon Trust, to make sure that the advisory or that the research consortium moves forward as smoothly as possible. So we support the work of the research consortium, including coordination, facilitating meetings, and implementing the RFP process through the Governor's Energy Office. We have a steering committee, which provides the overall direction and support, including decision-making around budget allocation and project selection. The advisory board, which is the biggest piece of the research consortium, they make the formal recommendations to the steering committee on research priorities and project selection. And then they also have a lot of technical expertise and provide project guidance. And then we also have a group of collaborators that contribute to these discussions, share relevant updates, and provide technical review as needed. Then within the advisory board, we have subcommittees that can provide project-specific technical guidance and advice, especially as these research questions are being scoped out, to understand what the most needed research is at the moment. So I'm going to dive in a little bit into these two groups. The theme that I'm kind of touching on here is a model to bring diverse ocean users and stakeholders, including communities, private and public sector, together. So to do that, I wanted to dive in, kind of show a little bit more about what the advisory board looks like. So these are all different groups that were legislatively mandated to be on the research consortium. So commercial and recreational harvesting interests, we have Patrice McGarren, Jack Cunningham, Ben Martens, Terry Alexander, and Mary Beth Tooley and Bob Humphrey. Terry is one of 2 co-chairs from the advisory board. We have Maine-based environmental groups, so Jocelyn Runnebaum and Sarah Haggerty. Coastal community representatives, we have Bill Needleman right now. State agencies, Carl Wilson from DMR, John Perry from Inland Fish and Wildlife, and Stephanie Watson from the Governor's Energy Office. There's also a lot of scientists from private and public research institutions. Allison Bates, who's also a co-chair, Damian Brady, Wing Goodall, Walt Musil, Graham Sherwood, Kanai Tokunaga, Anthony Vaselli, Ann Zoidis, and Gail Zidlewski. And we have offshore wind industry experience, Dave Cowan, Julian Fraze, Laura Morse, and Wojciech Wachowski. And then an at-large position is Dan Salerno. An unfilled advisory board seat that's legislatively called to have is a tribal representative, which is unfilled at the moment, and the Governor's Energy Office is having conversations at that level with tribal government. And then I wanted to highlight coordination with other research consortiums. So this is pretty critical and the theme of today's session. So as you can see at the bottom, all of the different other consortiums that are on this panel are also on the collaborators list, and the Carbon Trust is also very fully involved in this through the program management side. So it's really helpful to have the collaborators be a part of all of the advisory board meetings to provide a lot of context for the discussion, make sure that the discussion is fully grounded in the most recent research needs. And a lot of the advisory board members, for example, are also on the RWSC advisory subcommittees. So some key research activities right now. Thank you. So the advisory board throughout the past year and a half has been going through this iterative research prioritization process, defining the research questions that are going to be asked for main interest, exploring the gaps in knowledge, scoping RFPs. So this is kind of a process that's building on itself. So far, one round of research has been put out. So the RFP was open in November last year, and then we're currently in the initial period of performance for 3 different projects that came out of this prioritization process. One was a socioeconomic data inventory to understand what data we have, what the gaps are, where we need to go in the future. Another to understand what coexistence of floating offshore wind and the fishing industry in Maine could look like, what that means to the industry. And then another was mapping, an MOU with the Maine Coast Mapping Initiative to fill some of the highest priority mapping needs. We're currently going through a prioritization process for the next round. And so a lot of those top research priorities are things that have come out of the entire research process but weren't right at the top of the list for the last time. So some of those are understanding the risk of secondary entanglement with floating offshore wind, understanding bat movement, and understanding kind of the secondary piece, like where do we go now that we have the second socioeconomic inventory? What are the best practices that are coming out of that? What are the recommendations for understanding how Maine communities are going to be impacted? So anticipating that round 2 will come out soon, and then by the end of the year, hopefully being able to have another round of research funding. So just making sure this is consistently moving along, that the research process is iterative on top of each other. And then I'll close it off there and saying that also as part of this, we also are seeing this research consortium as kind of seed funding that's coming from the state right now, and looking to the other research programs, looking to what else is happening across other states and federal agencies to see how these priorities overlap with each other and how those different funding mechanisms can be leveraged to be able to answer the right questions. Okay.
Thank you, Katy. Now I'd like to welcome Julia Dombroski from the National Offshore Wind Research and Development Consortium.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you, Ivan, for organizing this, and thank you for all the panelists. I think this is going to be, it's already a fantastic discussion. My name is Julia Dombroski. I have a background on behavioral ecology and marine mammal studies, technology development, and I work at the NOWRDC. It's how we call the National Offshore Wind Research and Development Consortium. It's a mouthful, so I'm going to use NOWRDC from now on. NOWRDC, it's a nonprofit that was created with funds from NYSERDA and DOE to fund prioritized R&D activities. Today, we have members that include 7 states, 10 developers, and 10 public and independent members. And at NOWRDC, my main focus is to work with innovation and technology innovation. So this is really the best place that I could be to talk a little bit about the support, this expert support to build a strong and future-proof industry. That was the prompt that was given us for this panel. And then it really got me thinking. When I read this future-proof term, I was really intrigued because what it came to mind, it was something static. It was something rigid. It was like an armor or a shield or something like that. And I wasn't sure if that was 100% in line with the work that we actually do. So I went to ChatGPT. And this was what ChatGPT told me that future-proof actually was. And I'm going to read the definition, but I really want you to pay attention to the terms that are highlighted in there. So the definition for future-proof industry that ChatGPT gave me was that it means designing or planning something in such way that it remains effective and useful over a long period, despite changes or developments in technology, market conditions, or other external factors. Essentially, it means being prepared for the future challenges and changes to minimize the need for major adjustments and updates. And I thought this was great to explain what we don't do. This is absolutely not the definition of future-proof that we work under. So at NOWRDC, what we actually do, we do want to design and plan for R&D activities that will remain effective and useful over a long time. But it has nothing to do to despite changes. We want changes. What we actually do is we want to drive technology development and keep track of the changes in the market conditions to maximize the alignment of R&D activities and innovation with the offshore wind development needs. So I tried to summarize my entire presentation with this little story and this one little slide. So when we're talking about collaboration, what NOWRDC actually does is to facilitate the strategic collaboration, and we also participate in collaboration. We are able, as a neutral party, to talk to industry, public sector, and academia, precisely to first identify key knowledge gaps and technology development needs. We fund R&D activities to precisely address those gaps and needs that we identified. And then right now we are really working on closing the R&D cycle and working with support of innovation commercialization. So I'm going to briefly give you examples of these 3 activities. There is much more to the work than what is going to be presented here. We have different collaborative approaches to many different programs, and we're happy to talk more about it during the discussion. But first, let's talk about how we work on identifying key knowledge gaps and technology development needs. So an example of that is how NOWRDC works with industry, with academia, and with the public sector to draft a research and development roadmap every 2 years. So in this roadmap, we have 3 pillars of potential topics related to the offshore wind industry. And in each one of the topics, we identify the state of the art of the science and of the technology. And then we identify the gaps, and we definitely plan for future development. So where would be a strategic theme areas within these 3 pillars for us to invest on R&D research? We are at this point with the version 4 of the roadmap, and the roadmap is available on our website. And I have a slide in the end with the QR code to our slide. So a lot of what we do and a lot of what we are known for is precisely the funding of R&D activities. As I mentioned before, when NOWRDC was created, we had a big pool of funds, what we call the core fund, that was provided by DOE and NYSERDA, and we were funded in 2018. So over the past 6 years, we have been mainly working on acquiring more funds and then distributing those funds. So we ran 4 competitive solicitations to date. We were able to fund 57 projects, and then invested, it's a better word, $55 million in R&D research. And for all those programs that were funded by us, 5 of them, for instance, to date are related to environmental and what we used to call conflicting use of the ocean. Now we're adapted, we changed a little bit, of course. And some of our partners that were funded here are actually on the audience, so thank you. And then we obviously provide some additional support to the funded projects. We don't stop there. One way to facilitate collaboration is forming advisory boards with industry experts for each one of the funded projects. We have a database that is available in our website with all the projects that were funded to date and a little bit of information about all of them. And we have a fantastic symposium as well at the end of each year. And finally, we close the R&D cycle looking at commercialization of innovation. There's no healthy industry without the disruption of innovation. And one of the examples of those collaborative programs to support commercialization innovation is the Offshore Wind Innovation Hub. So this is a startup accelerator program that we participate. It's mainly funded by offshore wind developer Equinor, and then we run it with our partners at NYU and with the New York City Economic Development Corporation. NOWRDC provide technical insights, oversee mentorships, and provides access to our network. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about this project. As I mentioned before, this is the main project that I work at NOWRDC. These are the startups that are currently in the program. It's a 6-month intensive program. The QR code is going to take you to the page of the Offshore Wind Innovation Hub, and we can talk a little bit more about these technologies as well. A lot of them are relevant to environmental and co-use issues and solutions. And this is basically a summary of what I wanted to provide you today. I am done. I just want to really let you guys know that we have released an intent for our 4.0 solicitation. That's a $10.6 million pool to fund innovations in Florida offshore wind. We have 3 main topics, given one of them, the last one that is highlighted in there. It's really relevant for environmental and co-use solutions. So feel free to check it out. I have here links to the website and the LinkedIn of NOWRDC. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Julia. And now the final presentation is from Mike Pohl from the Responsible Offshore Science Alliance.
Thank you, Ivan, and good morning. And I suspect if you work on fisheries and offshore wind, then you know ROSA, so this might be it'll be filling in the gaps of some of your knowledge. And if you don't work with fisheries and offshore wind and just work with offshore wind, then Emily's presentation, I suspect, would have been pretty basic for you. But so Ivan asked me to talk about efficiency in serving the community needs. And so I think I'll just start out by saying ROSA up until March of this year, we consisted of 2 full-time staff. We recently added 3 full-time staff, a third full-time person in Tricia Perez. And if you were here on Tuesday, then you would have met our interns who were here for the summer. So I'm going to show you who we are and what we do, or what we're working on, and you can judge for yourself whether we're efficient about meeting our community needs. So our mission is to advance research, monitoring, and methods on the effects of offshore wind and energy development on fisheries across U.S. waters. So birds, bats, we don't really talk, protected species, we don't talk about that except when it comes to protected fish. So we work closely with the RWSC where we overlap, or somewhat overlap, in our missions. We serve as an objective resource for all sectors and facilitate the coordination of regional scientific research to collaboratively and efficiently deepen understanding. All sectors, there's a caveat to that you'll see in my next slide. So we were formed in early 2019. We're a 501c3, which means we're a scientific nonprofit. And some offshore wind developers and some commercial fisheries representatives got together and said there should be an organization like ROSA. And the 4 pillars that we promote and we rely on and our core values are that we're scientific and objective and collaborative and transparent. So if you're familiar with the Responsible Offshore Development Alliance, they were part of our origin story, but they are a trade organization, and as such, they are advancing the interests of commercial fisheries. Here's our organizational structure. My word art got a little wonky there, but on our right, you can see how we're structured. We have a board of directors that is responsible for fiduciary and operational oversight, and those were initially 50% commercial fisheries representatives and 50% offshore wind developers. We've since expanded the board to include other sectors. We have an advisory council that I will go into more detail about, but those are people who are appointed. They are sort of our legislature. They provide us with strategic direction and priority setting. We have a pool of research advisors, which is pretty much open to anyone who has expertise in fisheries and offshore wind, and they are sort of our pool of people that we can call upon for scientific review or input, and we sometimes form committees for those groups to work together to address a specific topic, which some of which I'll be mentioning. So just to give you an idea of who's represented in the advisory council, you can see there's, so these are a fixed number of people of offshore wind, representatives of offshore wind developers, federal agencies, including National Marine Fisheries Service, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, fishery councils, and the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. All the states along the Atlantic coast have seats, and commercial and recreational fishermen. So that I've put the research advisors, they were meant to be small and sort of curvy, and they support the actions of the advisory council and are called upon as needed. The asterisk, the caveat is, we used to say we represented all stakeholders. About a year ago, it became pretty apparent that we had a blind spot when it came to tribal nations, and so we're working on representation for tribal nations in our structure. So we do a lot of things where our community calls upon us to do a lot of things. Right now we're working on 3 key objectives, and I'm going to give you examples of how we're addressing those. So we administer regional offshore wind fisheries research and monitoring using, we'll be initially using funding from the New York State solicitations. If you were here on Tuesday, you saw the release of Fish Forward, which is our database of ongoing research projects and existing research priorities. And I wish I had a QR code, but if you do research and wondering if your project is in that database, please go to our website or see Tricia Perez and tell her, or find a way to look at it. And kind of a really cool thing that happened was, as we thought about developing this database so I could identify research gaps, we realized there were a lot of groups doing research on, or funding research related to offshore wind. So we brought them together under Tricia's leadership to talk to each other, to find out, to be efficient about coverage of topics, and upcoming potential solicitations, and also guidance on the best practices when it came to issuing RFPs. And so we are currently working on a regional RFP process, so we hope to be announcing an RFP in the next couple of months. Yes. And then hopefully we'll be, in the near future, doing some project awarding and management. To address the second key objective, to facilitate assessment of regional and cumulative impacts, whole bunch of things going on. Ooh, 2 minutes. Uh-oh. So we're working on data standardization. That's something we've heard from our community that has to exist in order for regional assessment of impacts to occur. We're standing up a data governance committee. We also announced that on Tuesday. I should also have had a QR code for that. But let us know if you're interested in being part of that. You can see the funding coordination. Our flagship project right now is our project monitoring guidelines to help developers write fishery monitoring plans for their applications. And we're currently updating those guidelines. We also talked about that on Tuesday. We're also standing up communities of practitioners. We have an acoustic telemetry committee, and that has, so we're hoping to try and solve some of the issues on a practitioner-by-practitioner basis. And we held listening sessions to update those guidelines. So we like to say that we're uniquely, so this is partly something I used to say, is that at the center of fisheries and offshore wind, there is a ROSA-shaped gap. And this slide sort of addresses that we're uniquely situated to coordinate across the various funding sources, the various research institutions and organizations, and data infrastructures. And I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong slide. Oops. So anyway, don't really have time to go through this, but we build coordination through engagement. So we do an awful lot of this. We bring people together. We bring sectors together to talk about things, to do things together. So that includes Fish Forward, the communities of practitioners, a lot of listening and working sessions. We have a quarterly meeting. We organize sessions at the American Fisheries Society, the World Fisheries Congress, or meetings like that. And we participate in an awful lot of advisory panels. Sorry, this was the slide. We're uniquely situated to coordinate and across research, funding research sources, et cetera. So we like to say that a collaborative commitment that we're producing a bridge across sectors. We promote science-based discourse around ocean co-use, and we're supporting meaningful solutions. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mike. So we had a few themes that we hopefully have touched on a little bit during the presentation, and I can see some of the questions that have come through are kind of along these themes also. So one of the themes we touched on was addressing community concerns with regard to offshore wind research. And I will come to you, Emily, first with a question on does RWSC incorporate or engage with Indigenous communities to share or connect people with traditional ecological knowledge resources?
Great question. The very short answer is yes, but the longer answer is through our co-hosts, which are the Northeast Regional Ocean Council and Mid-Atlantic Regional Council on the Ocean, who each have tribal engagement coordinators, we work pretty closely to understand the capacity of tribes to participate in another initiative. We know there's a lot being asked of tribes in our region right now, and the capacity to participate is a real challenge. So that's what we've learned in recent conversations over the past year, is that additional support is needed to ensure more tribal participation in things like offshore wind research coordination. So to address that, we've been working with folks to bring in additional support on the RWSC team to engage with tribes specifically, hear how they want to engage with RWSC. I did mention our 4-sector framework. This was something that that group, actually it originated at a State of the Science meeting, the very first one in 2018. This structure for RWSC was envisioned. We inherited that structure and have been implementing that structure, and now we're hearing we would like some more information about how the tribes could participate and be more integrated into not only the governance of RWSC but the subcommittees and the rest of our work as well. I will also note that the subcommittee meetings and many of our workshops and events are entirely open to the public, so anyone that has capacity and interest can join at any time, and our event list is fully public, but we do recognize that and are working on providing additional capacity to get more perspectives incorporated.
Brilliant, thank you. And a linked question for you, Katy. Following the timely presentation this morning on Indigenous tribes and offshore wind development, why is there only one tribe represented when there are multiple nations in Maine?
Yeah, that's a great question. That is a great question. So that is, and I'll just point out, there was one seat up there because it was legislatively mandated to have a tribal representative. And those are all the absolute baseline. That's a minimum. And I think if, there's 4 federally recognized tribes in Maine, and I think that everyone would welcome participation. But as Emily said, there is a serious capacity issue. And just, it's a lot to ask tribal representatives to come to all of these advisory board meetings. So, yeah, I think that is the one position is the minimum that the governor's energy office is trying to figure out how to meet. But of course, having more tribal representation would be much better.
Brilliant, thank you. And then I suppose a question I'd like to ask maybe everyone is, what has been the reception from concerned communities to the establishment of your respective programs? And maybe I'll start with Mike and come along.
Yeah, is this on? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so I wasn't there at the origin, but I wasn't part of ROSA at the beginning, but I was working on offshore wind at the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries, and I had the thought, like, this organization wants to do a lot of things that aren't being done. So I think there's we have tremendous engagement, and I think people react to us with enthusiasm because we keep getting asked to do more and more things. So and I think in any group there's some people who feel, yeah, I'll just say that. I think people are enthusiastic, they support us, they encourage us to do more.
Yep, I would echo everything Mike said, and I think the mission of both of our organizations is kind of plainly states we don't know everything, and we're trying to learn more about potential impacts and just the ecosystem in general. And so that's sort of our humility in this, is not to assume we know everything or solve all the problems, or that offshore wind is perfect and there's no issues. We're approaching it with completely open slate, and everyone has the ability to influence how we do that and how we learn more.
I think similar to Mike, I was not there when NOWRDC was created. I arrived a little over a year ago, but my genuine impression is that an organization that has the power to be neutral and at the same time provides such rigorous technical oversight and has such a competent body to just a governance structure that is so well such a well-oiled machine to manage the amount of funds that we have been managing in our history, that has been celebrated in the industry. And I'm really proud of it. It's a really interesting work to be able to navigate through all the bubbles that we have been talking about: academia, governance, other public institutions and private institutions, and have such open dialogue with developers to be able to really identify their needs without some of the reservations that might exist between the bubbles when NOWRDC is not there, and I think that can only benefit industry. So I think the reception has been really great. We are going over a sort of we're thinking about the next steps at NOWRDC. Our core funding has been fully allocated, and that has been a fantastic job of the team. So now we're strategically trying to identify where to go next, and everything that we have been hearing from our members and from the folks that we work very closely with, RWSC, ROSA, Carbon Trust, the mains office, like it has been so positive. And the perspectives, I think, for the future are as bright as our past has been.
Brilliant, thank you. Just I would say from kind of our experience within ORJIP, again, very positive reception. I think that some of the core principles that allow a positive reception are, as you mentioned there, neutrality and kind of being independent so that you can be driven by the research, and also just involvement. The increased involvement we've learned through our project selection processes, our scoping processes have really allowed people to feel like they're a little bit more valued in the process than if they're only reading reports when they're delivered right at the end. So just being kind of really inclusive throughout, I think, has kind of helped garner a positive reception.
Yeah, I'll add. I mentioned that the research consortium, the need was identified during the roadmap process that included those multi-year process through main communities, and there were a lot of different people that were involved in that process. And the research consortium was one of the things that was called out. We needed a neutral place for this research to happen. So I think the fact that it exists now, it was a direct outcome of that process, is something that people really see as a win. I also think it was really good that Maine Sea Grant has come into the program management role. The Sea Grant programs are experienced in leading research programs and have policy neutral standpoint, not advocating one way or the other, just trying to get good information out to people. So I think that's a great role. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Going to some of the questions on the app. For Mike and Emily, can you please explain how the Fish Forward database differs from the database being developed by RWSC?
Yeah. I'm thinking you know your database.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
You do.
Oh. I don't know which microphone to use. Okay. So simply, the separation between our missions and scope is wildlife and environment, fisheries and environment. So we overlap on things like habitat and oceanography. But there's a real difference in some of the required monitoring and the voluntary monitoring around fisheries and wildlife and some of the other ecosystem components. So what you'll find is some overlap between our databases where there are projects focused on habitat and oceanographic features, but primarily all of the wildlife projects, research projects, and required monitoring rest in the RWSC database. And the fisheries monitoring projects and research are in the Fish Forward database. And our teams are very collaborative, and I think our databases are compatible in the sense that we have very similar structure, and we're providing very similar amounts of project information or types of project information, and hoping to make it as easy as possible on users who are interested in both things, that they can go to each place and get the information they need. And of course, if you're ever confused about those things and you're like, I think I have a boundary issue and it might be in both places, I need help, you can contact me and Mike and Trisha and Renee and anybody on the RWSC team, and we'll help you get the thing that you need.
Yeah. And I would add two things to that. One is that, so we have if you go to Fish Forward, there's a link to the RWSC database, just because we recognize that. Good, thank you. And yeah, that's intentional. We talk about it with each other. One thing, actually, we're also hoping to do is projects that have spatial locations. We're hoping to pass those spatial locations to the RWSC because, among many things, Emily's a really good mapper. Is that fair? And so we're taking advantage of that expertise to maybe give a more global mapping sense of where all the projects work, including the fisheries projects.
Brilliant, thank you. Emily, coming straight back to you here. Does RWSC have designs to become a national resource, or a sort of clearinghouse for all offshore wind, or is it concentrating on just the East Coast and or Northeast?
This is probably the question I get the most. It's global. No, just kidding. So we were formed to be Atlantic Coast focused, but our steering committee recognizes the opportunity that some issues we work on, like data management and mapping and things like that, are immediately translatable to other regions. And they recognize, though, that the structure that we have, our governance structure with the sectors and how we engage the research community and things like that, might not be a one-size-fits-all for other regions, right? Every region may need a different solution. And so we work very closely with the West Coast folks that are working out there on a similar science collaborative, and in the Gulf of Mexico as well, to share lessons learned about really boring things like the fiscal structure and management of an organization like that, but also, you know, how we have set up as a governance body and how we do our work. So we're very happy to share lessons learned, but we don't have any immediate plans to take over the rest of the nation on that.
We get the same question. I don't know if you want me to preemptively
deal
with that. Yes, so we get asked the same question, and like Emily, like the RWSC, we're paying attention to other regions. As you can see from our structure, we don't formally have representation from other regions in our governance structure, but this is a topic that's under discussion. So we're talking about it, and that's not a decision for me to make. That's part of the board. The reason we have a board of directors, and it's also Renee's decision to make. But we are, as you can get a sense of, I hope you got a sense from everything I presented, we're at capacity for what we can, what we're handling now, and maybe beyond capacity.
Yeah, and if I may, maybe I think it's an interesting contrast with NOWRDC, because NOWRDC is nationally focused. So we are talking about R&D activities and trying to identify needs and fund projects across the entire U.S. And that goes with us being able to host members across the U.S. So states from all over, west, east, Gulf, anywhere. And also it brings us to a very interesting place to be able to connect folks that are not in the East Coast with RWSC and with ROSA's concepts, because I feel like there is like we're walking parallel paths, but the timing is a little bit different when we're talking about regional development of offshore wind. And being able, again, and I'm echoing basically what Mike and Emily said, bring the lessons learned to the table. It's really important, and I think as a nationally focused nonprofit, we're trying to do that.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a question in here which is targeted for Emily, Katy, and Mike. I'm going to expand it maybe slightly. The original question is, what are the best ways for state planning groups to interact with regional groups? One of our themes is around kind of coordinating efforts between different collaborative programs. So I suppose the question that I'm going to ask, I'll start with you, Katy. So the question here is, what are the best ways for state planning groups to interact with regional groups? But I suppose to expand that slightly between different collaborative research programs, what are the best ways to coordinate and to kind of ensure that research is coordinated?
Well, I think I don't have the silver bullet for that question. I think it's something that's continually trying to being figured out. I mentioned that all of the different regional groups and state entities across the region are part of the collaborators group. So, and that in addition to, having those different groups join our advisory board meetings and participate in the discussion, it's also program management team reaching out to the different contexts and saying, okay, this is what our advisory board is saying. Are there other overlapping priorities that you all have? How can funding be leveraged across those? I think some kind of more formal mechanism could also be great, like some kind of workshop where all of these groups come together could be really nice to not just have those conversations in an ad hoc way, but in a more coordinated way.
In terms of what we do, I suppose in the UK to try and coordinate that a little bit, I mean, on a really practical basis, we have monthly coordination calls with all of the relevant research programs just to give kind of quick updates of where people are. But I suppose where the kind of key pinch points are and where it's most important is when there are project selection rounds, ensuring that there's no kind of project duplication, and that various kind of other inputs and scopes that might have been developed elsewhere and aren't funded can all feed in, so the research can be kind of conducted with as much literature behind it as possible. And I think that, and then also in terms of selecting ideas that are have been identified as relevant across different areas. So you're prioritizing research that has been already discussed in other groups too, where that has been the case, so that gives you kind of even greater comfort that that's kind of high priority.
So I just asked Emily if I could go ahead because I've been itching to talk about the funding coordination group that we put together and first met in May, which we're planning to have meet annually. Semi-annual, twice a year. So that's literally getting everyone in the region who's funding offshore wind research talking to each other to do exactly what Ivan was talking about. And so there is a formal group, and Tricia led it, is leading that. And then the second bit I did want to mention, one of the things that's in Fish Forward was there was a lot of effort to set research priorities in the first years. So many years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and so we've put them all in Fish Forward. That was a way of sort of saying, okay, we've done the prioritization. Let's keep track of what people said were priorities, and let's see if we can tick them off one by one. One big groups. Sorry.
No, yeah, that's great. Thanks, Mike. RWSC has a formal mechanism as well. We have a state caucus, and so the main Governor's Energy Office, who runs the research consortium, is a member of that caucus, as is New Jersey RMI and NYSERDA and each of the states. So all 14, I think it's 14, Atlantic coast states from Maine to South Carolina participate in the state caucus. For example, they sort of self-organized a meeting later this summer where they're going to talk about similarities and differences in their solicitations with respect to environment and wildlife monitoring and mitigation requirements. So the states want to exchange lessons learned with each other about what they're each requiring of offshore wind projects. That's one example. We also have a formal annual funding strategy meeting that's across sectors, but of course the states are included in that. And it's very similar to what ROSA just implemented, where we want that exchange among funders to happen to talk about not only what you funded recently, but what you're looking ahead to fund. So you can inform each other and maybe look for opportunities to leverage and collaborate, but also inform RWSC as we, again, as I mentioned, seek relatively soon to put out our own RFPs. We want to make sure that they're consistent with what you all are funding and can build on that or reach areas that just don't get a lot of attention, for example, and address data gaps. So, great question.
I'll come straight back to you, Emily, just to see if there's anything additional you want to say. The question here is, are there mechanisms you could suggest for requiring sharing information on research funding / planning?
Requiring?
Research funding / planning,
yeah. Beyond all of the things I just mentioned, we've worked really closely with states and the developers, all the sectors really, to help suggest contract language that they can use that in their RFPs and even in their agreements with research teams to require, it's my favorite word, coordination with RWSC and participating in our subcommittees to report out on what you're finding in your research and just tell the community what you're working on, so that, again, it's just all about creating this situational awareness in the community that someone is studying that and you know, we have the opportunity to either collaborate with them and leverage that or address something else because that's already covered, right? So that's the ultimate goal of the requiring. It's not to be overly burdensome, but it's to make sure that, hey, you all formed a collaborative group like RWSC and ROSA, let's use it, right? Like and if we need to require it, to just remind folks that it's an expectation and it's part of what we all do as our sort of best practice, then why not?
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, the next question, I suppose, is a kind of challenge perhaps to all of us. Deltara has illustrated to us the importance of physical oceanography data. Who is organising and serving this data? Does anyone? Sorry. Deltara has illustrated to us the importance of physical oceanography data. Who is organising and serving this data?
So one of my many affiliations is NOWRDC, the Northeastern Regional Association of Coastal Ocean Observing Systems. And so that's part of the integrated ocean observing system across the nation. There's 11 different regional associations that work within their region to do exactly that, kind of be the repository for the physical oceanography data, because that is especially important for, you know, providing covariates for all of the wildlife and fisheries research that's happening. Tom Shaika is here, and if anyone was in his talk, he mentioned this mid-ocean data pipeline project that we're going to start, and so that's going to be streamlining integration from all of the new data sources from offshore wind of physical oceanography data into something that's publicly accessible. But yeah, key to that is establishing the quality control and the metadata and kind of the pipelines to get it through, because it's complicated. And so making sure there's a central repository that's accessible to other researchers is really important. And happy to talk more about that later.
Thank you for taking that one. Julia, one for you. When you support R&D, is there a requirement for open protocols or standards?
So that's a great question, and I think I'm going to answer it in the lines of what Emily mentioned really recently. So what we do is we really encourage the use of standard protocols, and a lot of the funds that we distributed so far were tied to, well, they're federal and state funds. So there are definitely data management and the data management plans that go attached sort of to federal funds. We follow that, and we also encourage as much as we can engagement with ROSA, with RWSC, to really promote what we believe. I think RWSC, ROSA, and NOWRDC are kind of, we share a similar bloodline here, and I think we ultimately work under the same values. So we definitely try to ensure that in contracting and when we are really advising the management of the data of the projects that we fund.
Brilliant.
Can I add to that, actually? It's hard in some of these panels, you all hear kind of like a broad brush on some fairly nuanced issues, right? But I've heard this come up in a couple different contexts, so I wanted to weigh in on the idea that there might be proprietary concerns related to some of the things that NOWRDC funds, and same for RWSC. And even in the academic community, not proprietary in the commercial sense, but maybe you all have students that need to publish work, and there's concerns about immediately releasing and sharing data and things like that where they have that sort of value. And so just want to note that we all recognize that, and we want to find this balance between, okay, we're funding information gathering to support decision making, but we also have these other things, you know, whether it's commercial sensitivity or academic, you know, I don't know what the word is, the academic framework for publishing and things like that. So we recognize that balance. We want to work with you, but we also want to make sure we can move forward and make decisions with the data that you all are funding and the data that are being collected in a way that makes sense for everybody.
Yeah, and I think centralizing information about who's the data collector and look, this data exists, and facilitating the connection of those who are using or planning to use a data with those who own it in a way. It's a lot of what we do. But yeah, thanks, Emily, for that. I think we're 100% in line in that sense. We respect data use restrictions, but we do want to make folks aware that this effort is happening to avoid duplication and to maybe foster collaboration in the future.
Thank you both. One of the other themes that we were to touch on is around cross-border collaboration. We've got just a couple of minutes left, but I suppose I'd like to just have a quick go along the panel once more to ask the question of, is your program currently seeking any opportunity or kind of engaging internationally in any way? And if not, why not? And what have been the kind of benefits that you've seen around that? I'll start with you again, Mike.
Right. We are engaged with ICES working groups, so that's a cross-border collaboration. It's maybe not sort of directly working with a particular country, but that's working with an important treaty, the International Council for the Exploration of the Seas, and certainly we're looking to other places for expertise, and we've had experts from outside the United States at our quarterly advisory council meetings. So that's sort of an answer. Yes?
Yes, I will echo that and be quick because we get in the time limitation. Our experts that participate in our subcommittees come from all over the world too, and we want to absolutely leverage the expertise in Europe and other places. We've got connections in Australia too. I had no idea Australia was pursuing offshore wind, but they've reached out and asked for lessons learned from RWSC as well. So it's been great to see.
Yeah, I can say that NOWRDC is definitely looking outside the U.S. We have an example, for instance, of a joint solicitation with Innovate UK, because we understand some of the issues just don't respect borders, as much as Marine members also don't respect borders. But we are definitely looking outside, lessons learned, and trying to leverage international funds as much as possible. I think when we talk about funds and being strategic about investment, the more the merrier.
I already touched on a little bit of mine, but certainly across Europe, there's a lot of international collaboration going on, and certainly keen for more of that over here as well.
I outlined that so the objective of the main research consortium is to study the local and regional effects in the Gulf of Maine. Obviously, Maine is not the only state in the Gulf of Maine. There's New Hampshire and Massachusetts that also have a lot of interests and priorities there. So yeah, we're actively looking to see how those priorities can overlap with those of New Hampshire, those of Massachusetts. And then
Katy, I
also,
think your mic is not working.
better? Did you hear anything? Okay, so Gulf of Maine is more than just Maine. We're trying to understand how to work across the Gulf of Maine. And then also across not just the geographic borders, but understand how to... California is also floating wind. What are their priorities with secondary entanglement risk, for example? So yeah, there's a huge need, a huge opportunity to look beyond borders.
Okay, we'll wrap it up there. Just like to say thank you so much to the panelists here. Thank you so much to you guys for engaging on the app. And yeah, thanks.